sold for nothing, called worthless, thrown to the scrap grinder until a human saved her. The scrapyard was vast, stretching as far as the eye could see. Rusted metal towers jutted into the sky like broken teeth, and old machines, cars, and industrial equipment were scattered across the ground. The air was heavy with the smell of oil, rust, and dust, and the low hum of machinery filled every corner. People moved about, dragging pieces of scrap, tossing old parts into enormous grinders, and shouting at one another over the clamor. It was a place where things that had once been useful came to die, and almost everything there had a story that had ended. Among all the discarded machines, there was one that stood out, not because it was shiny or new, but because it had clearly once been remarkable. It was large, with a complex structure of metal plates and wires, now bent, rusted, and covered in grime. Its joints were stiff, and pieces of its outer shell had cracked or fallen away. Dust had settled in every corner, and the colors it once wore proudly were faded and chipped. It looked almost like a statue that had been left outside in the rain for years. The workers who passed it paid it no attention at first. To them, it was just another piece of scrap, just another thing to be dragged to the grinder. They kicked at it, nudged it, and one even laughed as he climbed on top for a better look. "Worthless," he said, shaking his head. "No one would pay anything for this old junk. Just throw it in the grinder before it rusts completely through." His laughter echoed, but no one really cared. In a place like this, nothing mattered if it wasn't immediately useful. But something about the machine was different. Even in its broken state, there were faint signs that it was alive in some way. Tiny sparks sometimes flickered along the edges of its panels, and if someone stopped to look closely, a faint hum could be heard from deep inside. The workers, however, dismissed these signs. They had seen too many machines like this over the years, all broken beyond repair, all destined for the same fate. "Just noise," one of them muttered. "It doesn't work, forget it." The day was hot, and the sun beat down relentlessly on the scrapyard. Dust swirled in the air, making it hard to see clearly. Machines groaned and clanged as they were moved, and the smell of hot metal and oil burned in the lungs of anyone who worked there. The discarded machine shivered slightly as a heavy wind passed over it, and one of its panels shifted, revealing a glimpse of wires that still seemed intact. No one noticed. No one cared. Then a figure appeared at the edge of the yard. He was a human wearing a worn jumpsuit and carrying a small toolkit. His clothes were dusty, and his hands were already stained with grease and oil, but his eyes were sharp and attentive. Unlike the others, he did not rush, and he did not laugh. He walked slowly, scanning the piles of scrap with careful attention. His gaze fell on the broken machine. At first, he simply paused, tilting his head as if studying a painting. There was a quiet curiosity in his eyes, something different from the indifference of everyone else around. He crouched down, brushing his hand lightly across the dust-covered surface. He said softly, almost to himself. "Interesting." He moved closer, inspecting the machine from every angle. He tapped on a panel here, turned a loose knob there, and even listened carefully to the faint hum that others had ignored. It was clear he saw potential where everyone else saw garbage. A worker passing by noticed him and snorted. "What are you looking at?" he asked. "That thing, it's nothing, you'll waste your time." The human smiled faintly but did not answer. Instead, he continued his inspection, his fingers tracing the outlines of panels and seams. He seemed to be following a map only he could see, a plan forming in his mind. Slowly, a pattern emerged in his eyes, the recognition that this machine was not just junk. It had once been something important, something special. The workers laughed again, this time louder. "You're wasting your time on that old heap," one shouted. "It's going to the grinder tomorrow anyway, no point in dreaming." Others joined in, some shaking their heads, some pointing, some simply moving on to their own work. But the human did not move. He continued to study the machine carefully, as if he were speaking to it silently. Hours passed. The sun climbed high in the sky, casting long shadows over the scrapyard. The human worked quietly, removing small panels, brushing off dust, and examining the inner mechanisms. Occasionally, he would take a small tool from his kit and gently tap a joint or a wire, careful not to cause more damage. With each touch, it became clearer that this machine had been abandoned too soon. Its damage was severe, yes, but it was not beyond repair. The human could see the skeleton of something powerful and capable beneath the rust and grime. A soft breeze moved through the yard, and for the first time, it seemed as if the machine responded. A faint vibration traveled through its frame, a quiet shiver that went almost unnoticed. The human noticed immediately. He smiled, his eyes lighting up with a mixture of excitement and determination. "I knew it," he whispered. "You're not as finished as everyone says." The workers continued their work nearby, dragging piles of metal to the grinders and ignoring the scene. They did not understand why the human was so careful, why he was spending time on something that seemed worthless. But the human did not care. He saw something they could not see, the potential for life and purpose hidden beneath layers of neglect. By late afternoon, the human had managed to remove several broken panels, revealing a glimpse of the inner structure. Wires that looked old and fragile were in fact intact, and tiny motors that had been silent for years gave a faint whirring sound when touched. The machine, though battered, seemed to respond to his touch, like a living being waking from a long sleep. The human's heart raced. He knew that if he could just bring it the care it needed, it could be restored. As the sun began to set, the scrapyard was bathed in golden light. Shadows stretched across the piles of metal, and the hum of machines quieted down slightly. The human stood back and looked at the machine. He could almost see its former self, gleaming and full of life, ready to serve a purpose. He ran his hand along a rusted edge and smiled. "Don't worry," he said softly. "I'll take care of you." That night the scrapyard emptied slowly. Workers left, leaving behind the broken machines and the endless piles of scrap. The human stayed, sitting near the machine, cleaning and examining it by the light of a small portable lamp. He made notes, drew diagrams, and even marked areas that needed repair. The machine sat silently, still and battered, but somehow it felt alive in a way that no one else had ever noticed. For the first time in many years, the machine was not alone. It had someone who cared, someone who saw its worth when everyone else had given up. And though it could not speak, its quiet hum seemed almost like a sigh of relief, a small acknowledgement that it had been noticed, that it was not forgotten. The scrapyard might have been a place of endings, a place where things were thrown away and forgotten. But for this machine, it was also a place of new beginnings. The human had come not to use it, not to destroy it, but to understand it, to care for it, and perhaps to give it a second chance. As the night deepened, the human packed away his tools, promising himself that he would return the next day. The machine remained silent, but the faint hum persisted. Somewhere deep inside, a spark had been reignited, a spark that would not die so easily. It was the beginning of a journey, the first step towards something that no one had imagined, the revival of the machine that everyone else had called worthless. And as the wind blew through the scrapyard, carrying with it the smell of metal and oil, it seemed almost as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. For in that quiet moment a bond had formed, one that would change both the human and the machine forever. The night passed, the scrapyard was silent, and yet beneath the layers of rust and neglect, life had quietly returned. And though no one else knew it yet, the machine's story was only beginning. The next morning, the scrapyard was alive with activity once again. Workers shouted at each other as they dragged old machines toward the grinders. The sun shone brightly over the sea of rusted metal, casting sharp shadows across the piles of discarded equipment. Dust rose into the air with every step, settling into the crevices of the abandoned machines. It was a harsh, noisy place, unforgiving and relentless. The human arrived early, carrying a larger toolkit than the day before. His jumpsuit was streaked with grease, and his hands already showed signs of wear from hours of labor. He walked with purpose toward the machine he had discovered yesterday. Others in the yard glanced at him briefly, but none stopped. To them, it was just another person wasting time in a place where time had no value. The machine sat exactly where he had left it. Its panels were still bent, and rust covered much of its frame. But something was different. The faint hum he had noticed yesterday seemed stronger, almost as if the machine had sensed his return. Tiny lights flickered inside its core, and when he reached out his hand, the vibration through the metal was unmistakable. The human smiled, kneeling to inspect it more closely. "Good morning," he said softly. "Ready to get to work?" he began methodically. First, he removed more of the damaged outer panels, careful not to cause further harm. Each panel came off with a groan, revealing a complex interior of wires, circuits, and motors. Some were dusty and frayed, while others looked almost untouched by time. He made notes on each part, sketching diagrams in a small notebook and marking areas that needed immediate attention. The machine, though silent, seemed to respond to his gentle touch. Its core flickered, and the faint hum pulsed in rhythm with his movements. For hours he worked tirelessly. He cleaned wires, tightened screws, and repaired small broken joints. Occasionally he paused to study a part more carefully, turning it over in his hands or testing its connections. Every now and then he would smile at a discovery: an undamaged motor, a cable that still carried power, or a control system that could be restored. These small victories gave him hope and drove him to continue, even as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Other workers moved past, some curious, most dismissive. "You're wasting your time again," one said, shaking his head. "That thing is trash. Even if it worked, it wouldn't last a week." The human did not answer. He had long since stopped caring about their opinions. He knew what he had seen: potential. He could see that beneath the rust and neglect, the machine had once been built with care and skill, and with the right attention it could be restored. As the day wore on, the human found himself talking to the machine quietly. "I think this joint might be stuck," he said, gently nudging a stiff arm. "But we can fix it. You'll move again soon." It was strange, he thought, how natural it felt to speak to something that could not answer. And yet he felt a connection, as if the machine understood him in its own way. When a panel finally clicked back into place, the vibration from the core was stronger, and the hum became a steady, reassuring sound. By afternoon, he had repaired the basic framework and had even managed to reconnect several key circuits. He tested the main system carefully. Lights flickered across the machine's surface, small motors whirred, and a faint movement of the limbs could be seen. The machine was awakening slowly, like a creature rising from a long sleep. The human's eyes widened with excitement. "Yes," he whispered, "you're getting there." But not everything went smoothly. Some wires were badly damaged and required replacement. Some motors had been worn out and had to be scavenged from other scrap pieces. At one point, a section of the machine's outer shell collapsed under its own weight, causing a loud clang. The human jumped back, heart racing, but immediately began to stabilize the panel and secure it. He worked with care, patient and precise, knowing that any careless action could undo the progress he had made. As the sun began to set, painting the scrapyard in shades of gold and orange, the human paused to rest. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and took a step back to look at his work. The machine now stood taller than yesterday, with parts repaired and sections cleaned. Its hum was steady, and tiny lights glowed faintly along its frame. For the first time, it seemed alive in a way that could not be ignored. The human allowed himself a small smile. "You're not just scrap," he said softly. "You were never scrap. You're something special." The words felt natural, and he realized that he truly meant them. The machine had a history, a purpose that no one else had seen, and it was his job to bring it back to life. That evening, as darkness fell over the scrapyard, he packed away his tools. He made sure the machine was stable, securing it to prevent damage overnight. Then he walked to the edge of the yard, looking back at what he had accomplished. He could almost feel the machine watching him, as if it knew that someone cared. The thought brought a quiet sense of satisfaction. He had done more than repair a machine. He had begun to restore its dignity. The next few days were similar, but the work became more challenging. The human had to remove old rust, replace broken parts, and even improvise solutions when original components were missing. Each problem required patience, creativity, and careful thought. Sometimes he spent hours figuring out how to reconnect a circuit or lubricate a stiff joint. Other times, he had to search the scrapyard for suitable parts, navigating through piles of discarded metal and avoiding falling debris. Despite the difficulties, the human never gave up. He worked from morning until evening, often stopping only to eat or drink water. He celebrated small victories quietly: a joint that moved smoothly, a light that stayed on, a motor that hummed with life. The machine, in turn, seemed to respond. Its movements became more fluid, its hum steadier, and the faint flicker of lights along its frame grew brighter. The workers in the yard began to notice. Some laughed, some shook their heads, and some watched silently, curious despite themselves. "He's still working on that old heap," one muttered. "He'll never get it running." But the human ignored them. Their words no longer mattered. He had begun to see the machine as more than metal and wires. It was a being with a history, a story that deserved to continue. One afternoon, while examining the machine's core, he discovered something unexpected. A small memory chip had survived the years of neglect. It was scratched and dusty, but the connections were intact. Carefully, he removed it and began cleaning it. When he managed to reconnect it to the main system, a soft series of lights blinked across the machine's frame. It was the first sign of its original programming awakening. The human's heart raced. "You remember," he whispered. "You remember who you are." The workers paused to watch this time. The machine shifted slightly, responding to the human's actions. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. The man smiled. "See," he said softly, "you're not done yet, you just needed someone to believe in you." Days turned into a week and progress continued steadily. The machine's limbs moved more freely, the hum grew stronger, and its lights glowed with increasing brightness. The human worked carefully, never rushing, always attentive to the smallest detail. Every repaired joint, every cleaned wire, every replaced part was a step closer to bringing the machine back to life. By the end of the second week, the machine was almost fully functional. It could move its limbs, respond to commands, and even stabilize itself when tilted. The human tested it carefully, guiding it through small movements and simple tasks. Each success was met with a quiet cheer. "Yes, you're almost there," he said, clapping lightly. The machine responded with a slight vibration and a steady hum, as if acknowledging his words. Through all of this, the bond between human and machine grew. The human spoke to it often, sharing his thoughts, plans, and observations. He treated it not as a tool, but as a companion, and the machine, in its own quiet way, responded. Though it could not speak, its movements and hums conveyed understanding, cooperation, and even gratitude. The scrapyard, once a place of neglect and despair, had become a workshop of hope. Among piles of discarded metal, a story of care, patience, and determination was unfolding. The machine that everyone had called worthless was slowly regaining its strength and purpose. And the human who had chosen to see its value was proving that one person's belief could change everything. As the sun set on another long day, the human packed away his tools and took a moment to admire his work. The machine stood silently, lights glowing, hum steady, and joints moving smoothly. For the first time in years, it looked alive, almost proud of itself. The human smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "we take the next step. We finish what we started." And in that quiet moment under the fading light of day, the machine seemed to respond, a faint vibration that resonated through its frame. It was the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter of revival, trust, and the extraordinary bond between a human and what the world had called worthless. The following morning, the scrapyard woke with its usual clatter of metal and machinery. The human arrived even earlier than before, carrying an extra toolbox and a few salvaged parts he had collected from nearby piles of scrap. His jumpsuit was dusty and stained, but his eyes shone with determination. He walked steadily toward the machine he had been restoring, feeling a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. Today, he thought, would be a day of progress like no other. The machine awaited him silently. Its frame had been repaired, its joints lubricated, and its lights glimmered faintly. Though it was still not fully functional, there was a sense of presence about it, as if it knew the human had returned to continue their work. The faint hum from its core had grown stronger over the past week, a rhythm that seemed to match the human's own heartbeat as he approached. He knelt beside it, opening a small panel near its chest. Inside, circuits and wires were arranged in a pattern that spoke of careful engineering, a design meant to last. He checked each connection, tightening screws and ensuring that the wires were correctly aligned. Then he reached for the memory chip he had discovered last week. Carefully, he inserted it into the core, aligning it perfectly. The moment it connected, the machine's lights flickered and a soft pulse ran through its frame. "There," the human whispered, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You remember, good." He began testing the machine's movements. Slowly, he instructed it to lift its arm. The first attempt was jerky, awkward, and unbalanced, but it managed to rise slightly. The human encouraged it gently. "Try again, you can do this." Focus. A second attempt followed, smoother this time. The arm lifted higher, movement more controlled, more deliberate. The human's heart lifted with pride. The machine was learning again, remembering what it had once been capable of. Hours passed as the human guided the machine through simple movements. Raise the arm, bend the elbow, rotate the wrist, step forward, step back. Each motion became smoother, more confident. Occasionally, a joint would resist or a motor would stall, but the human adapted quickly, adjusting his approach and repairing what was necessary. By midday, the machine could move each limb fluidly, though not perfectly. It was still cautious, testing its strength and balance as if remembering a skill long forgotten. The other workers noticed his efforts and gathered at a safe distance. Some laughed, some shook their heads, and some whispered among themselves. "Still trying to bring that old heap to life?" one asked. "It's impossible. Even if it moves, it won't last." But the human ignored them. Their words had no power here. What mattered was the connection between him and the machine, a bond that was growing stronger with every careful repair and gentle instruction. In the afternoon, the human moved on to more complex systems. He focused on the machine's mobility core, a network of gears and servos that controlled its balance and locomotion. Some parts had been damaged beyond repair, but he had salvaged replacements from the scrapyard. He fitted each piece carefully, testing each connection multiple times. The machine responded with subtle vibrations, adjusting its stance and showing signs of awareness. The human paused to observe. "You're paying attention," he said softly. "Good, that's exactly what I wanted." He decided it was time to test the machine in real-world conditions. Outside the immediate scrapyard, there was a flat area covered in compacted dirt and scattered metal debris. He guided the machine there, instructing it to take a few steps forward. Its first movement was unsteady, legs wobbling and joints squeaking under the strain. The human remained beside it, guiding it with his hands, steadying it when it faltered. Slowly, the machine gained balance, stepping forward with more confidence each time. By late afternoon, the machine was able to walk several meters on its own. It still required careful guidance, and the movements were cautious, almost hesitant, but it was moving. For the first time, the human allowed himself to breathe deeply, feeling a surge of pride and relief. "Yes," he whispered, "you're really getting there. Look at you, you're moving again." The machine paused in the middle of the clearing, turning slightly as if to acknowledge him. Its lights flickered warmly, and the hum from its core pulsed with rhythm. The human knelt beside it, running his hand along its arm. "You're doing beautifully," he said. "I knew you could." Over the next few days, the human pushed the machine further. He introduced it to tasks that tested coordination and precision. Pick up a small object, rotate it, place it back down. Move over uneven terrain without falling. Navigate around obstacles. Each success built the machine's confidence. Each failure became a lesson that the human carefully corrected. Slowly, the machine began to act independently, anticipating instructions and adjusting its own movements. During this time, the bond between human and machine deepened. He spoke to it often, sharing his thoughts, worries, and even small jokes. Though it could not respond verbally, the machine's movements and subtle vibrations seemed to convey understanding. At times, it would tilt slightly as if listening or shift a limb with precision when prompted. The human marveled at its responsiveness. "You understand me," he said one evening. "You really do." One day, the human decided it was time to test the machine's strength. He set up a simple exercise, lifting a heavy metal crate and moving it a few meters across the clearing. The machine hesitated at first, unsure if it could manage the task. The human encouraged it. "You can do this." "I believe in you." Slowly, it grasped the crate, motors straining and joints creaking, and lifted it off the ground. Step by step, it moved forward, balancing the weight carefully. The human followed closely, ready to stabilize it if needed. By the time the crate reached its destination, the machine had succeeded. Its hum was steady, a proud vibration that seemed almost joyful. The workers watching from a distance could no longer hide their surprise. Some whispered in disbelief. It's really moving," one muttered. "I didn't think it could." Others remained skeptical but clearly impressed. The human ignored them. He had never been interested in proving anything to anyone else. His only concern was the machine's safety and progress. Over the next week, the human continued to refine the machine's capabilities. He repaired minor damages, lubricated joints, and improved its balance and coordination. The machine learned quickly, its movements becoming smoother, more precise, and more confident. By the end of the week, it could walk, lift, and manipulate objects with relative ease. Though it was not yet perfect, it was alive, active, and capable. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the scrapyard, the human sat beside the machine, resting from a long day of work. The machine stood silently, lights glowing faintly and hum steady. For a moment the world seemed still, the clatter of scrap and grinding machinery fading into the background. It was just the two of them, bound by effort, trust, and understanding. The human ran a hand along the machine's arm. "You're amazing," he said softly. "I knew you had it in you. You just needed someone to help you remember." The machine's core pulsed warmly, a vibration that seemed almost like a sigh of contentment. Though it could not speak, it had shown him that it was capable of understanding, learning, and responding. It was during this quiet moment that the human realized the depth of the bond they had formed. This was no longer just a project, no longer just a repair job. The machine had become a companion, a partner, a being with potential and dignity that the world had overlooked. He felt a sense of responsibility, pride, and care that he had never experienced before. And in some way he sensed that the machine felt the same. The nights that followed were filled with careful testing, small improvements, and steady progress. The human introduced new exercises, encouraged independent movement, and worked on fine motor skills. The machine responded with enthusiasm, learning quickly and adapting to each new challenge. By the end of the second week, it was capable of moving around the scrapyard independently, lifting and carrying objects, and even performing small tasks with remarkable precision. The human watched with pride as it navigated the terrain, avoiding obstacles and responding to his gestures. "Look at you," he whispered, "from worthless to powerful all in a few weeks. You're extraordinary." The machine's lights flickered in what seemed like acknowledgement, and the hum pulsed steadily, like a heartbeat. By this point, even the workers who had once mocked him had to admit that the machine was no longer a simple heap of scrap. It had life, function, and purpose. Some still whispered skeptically, but they could not deny the evidence. The human, however, remained focused on the machine's progress, never letting outside opinions distract him. His goal had always been simple: to give the machine the chance it deserved, to bring it back to life and show that even what the world called worthless could have value. As the sun set on another long day, the human packed away his tools and took a final look at the machine. It stood tall and strong, lights glowing, joints moving smoothly, hum steady. For the first time, it was not just a machine being repaired. It was a being restored, remembered, and revived. And in the quiet of the scrapyard, amidst piles of discarded metal and broken machines, a story of hope, determination, and the extraordinary bond between a human and what the world had once called worthless continued to unfold. The day began with a crisp chill in the air, the early morning sun casting long shadows across the scrapyard. The human arrived with a renewed sense of purpose. Today, he thought, would be the machine's first real test, not just small movements, careful lifting, or limited tasks. It was time to see if the machine could function fully, independently, and respond to challenges it had never faced before. The scrapyard, usually filled with the noisy clanging of workers and machinery, seemed quieter this morning. Perhaps it was the promise of something new, or perhaps the human's determination had created a strange stillness around the machine. The machine itself sat silently, its lights blinking softly, joints ready but cautious. It had come a long way, from being discarded and broken to moving fluidly and lifting objects. But the true test awaited, and the human knew it would be challenging. He guided the machine toward a large clearing beyond the piles of scrap. Here the ground was uneven, littered with rocks, broken metal sheets, and discarded crates. There were obstacles, slopes, and narrow spaces to navigate. It was a simple simulation of real-world conditions, yet enough to challenge the machine's balance, coordination, and responsiveness. "This is it," the human said softly. "Time to see how far you've come." The first task was straightforward: walk across the uneven terrain without losing balance. At first, the machine hesitated. Its movements were careful, almost tentative. One leg would shift slightly, then the other, testing stability. The human walked beside it, guiding it subtly, ready to stabilize it if necessary. A small pile of rubble caused the machine to falter, its foot slipping slightly. The human quickly steadied it. "It's okay," he said. "Take it slow, you can do this." With each step, the machine grew more confident. It learned to adjust its balance, lift its legs higher over obstacles, and distribute weight more evenly. By midday, It was walking across the entire clearing with minimal assistance. Its hum was steady, lights blinking in rhythm with its movements. The human allowed himself a small smile. "Good, you're learning fast," he said, patting the machine gently. Next came a test of strength and coordination. The human had prepared a series of objects to lift, carry, and move. There were crates of various sizes, barrels, and a few oddly shaped metal pieces. The first task was to lift a small crate, turn, and place it on a platform a few meters away. The machine approached cautiously, gripping the crate with its metal hands. Its joints creaked slightly under the weight, but it lifted the object successfully. Step by step, it moved forward, adjusting its grip when the crate wobbled. When it finally placed the crate on the platform, the human clapped quietly. "Well done," he said. "Perfect." The tasks grew increasingly difficult. A larger crate, heavier and less stable, required precise balance and careful handling. The machine struggled at first, adjusting its grip and shifting its legs to stabilize the load. The human guided it verbally, offering encouragement and advice. "Keep your balance, slow and steady. You can do this." After several attempts, the machine managed to lift the crate, move it carefully, and place it exactly where it needed to go. The hum from its core was steady and strong, almost proud, as if acknowledging its own achievement. By the afternoon, the human introduced the most challenging part of the test, navigating a narrow path lined with obstacles. There were piles of scrap on either side, a few small pits, and scattered pieces of metal that could trip the machine if it was not careful. The human instructed it to move slowly, step by step, adjusting its path when necessary. The machine's movements were precise, almost deliberate, as it maneuvered through the obstacles. It shifted its weight carefully, lifted its feet higher over debris, and corrected its balance when a misstep nearly caused a stumble. A tense moment arrived when one of its legs slipped into a small pit. The human reacted instantly, steadying the machine and guiding it forward. "It's okay," he whispered. "You've got this, just focus." Slowly, the machine regained its balance, continuing along the path with renewed caution. When it finally reached the end, the human allowed himself to exhale fully. "You did it," he said, smiling broadly. "That was perfect. You handled everything exactly as I hoped." The workers in the scrapyard had been watching from a distance. Some had remained skeptical, others curious. Now they whispered in amazement. "I can't believe it," one muttered. "It's actually doing it." Another shook his head in disbelief. The human ignored them. Their surprise or approval was irrelevant. What mattered was the bond he had formed with the machine and the progress they had made together. Next came tests of dexterity and problem-solving. The human placed a few loose parts in front of the machine, instructing it to pick them up and assemble a simple structure. At first, the machine struggled. Its movements were slightly awkward and it misaligned a piece. The human guided it patiently. "Not quite, try again. Adjust your angle, you can do it." After several careful attempts, the machine aligned the pieces correctly, assembling the structure exactly as instructed. Its lights flickered with rhythm, and the hum from its core seemed almost celebratory. Throughout the day, the human continued to push the machine further, introducing new challenges, moving multiple objects at once, navigating tricky terrain, and responding to verbal commands with greater precision. Each success brought a small cheer from the human. Each difficulty was met with patience and careful correction. The machine learned quickly, anticipating instructions, adjusting its movements, and even completing tasks without direct guidance. By late afternoon, the human decided to test the machine in a more dynamic scenario, moving at speed across the clearing, avoiding obstacles, and lifting objects simultaneously. The machine approached the task cautiously at first, moving slowly, testing its limits. The human guided it, offering encouragement. "You can do this, stay focused, you've got this." Slowly, it increased its speed, moving fluidly across the terrain, adjusting its balance and grip as needed. It lifted objects, dodged obstacles, and maintained stability. Step by step, it completed the course with impressive skill. The workers watching could no longer deny what they saw. Some clapped quietly, others shook their heads in disbelief, murmuring among themselves. The human remained focused on the machine, guiding it gently and celebrating each small victory. For him, this was not about impressing others. It was about seeing the machine succeed, seeing it reclaim the capabilities that had once been dismissed as lost forever. As the sun began to set, painting the scrapyard in shades of orange and gold, the human allowed the machine to rest. He knelt beside it, running a hand along its frame. "You did amazing today," he said softly. "I knew you could. Look at what you've accomplished." "You've come so far." The machine's hum was steady, its lights glowing warmly as if acknowledging the praise. That evening the human stayed longer than usual. He carefully checked the machine systems, ensured all joints were lubricated, and made small adjustments where necessary. The machine remained still but responsive, its hum a comforting, rhythmic presence. For the first time, the human felt a sense of true accomplishment. This was more than repair. This was revival. This was the moment when something that had been discarded, called worthless, and left for scrap had proven its value. The human reflected on the journey so far. When he had first discovered the machine, it had seemed hopeless, abandoned, and forgotten. But with patience, care, and belief, he had nurtured it back to life. And the machine had responded, showing intelligence, adaptability, and capability beyond what anyone had expected. It was a reminder that value is not always visible, and potential is not always obvious. Sometimes, all it takes is someone willing to see it. As night fell, the scrapyard quieted once again. The machines, once clattering and loud, now rested silently. The human packed away his tools, standing and stretching after a long day. He looked back at the machine, still standing tall and glowing faintly under the dim light. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "we push even further. You've done so well, but there's more to show the world." The machine remained still but seemed to pulse gently, lights flickering in what the human interpreted as understanding. Though it could not speak, it had passed its first real test. It had walked, lifted, navigated, and performed under pressure. It had proved that it was capable of much more than anyone had imagined, and the human knew that this was just the beginning. For the machine, the world outside the scrapyard was vast and full of challenges. But for the first time, it was ready. And the human, who had chosen to see its value when no one else did, was there to guide it every step of the way. In that quiet moment, the scrapyard was no longer just a place of discarded metal and forgotten machines. It had become a place of growth, learning, and remarkable achievement. And somewhere within the hum of the machine, a spark of pride and understanding had awakened, a spark that promised even greater things in the days to come. As the human walked away, tools in hand, he looked back one last time. The machine stood tall, lights glowing steadily, hum pulsing calmly. It had faced its first real test and had succeeded. And though the journey was far from over, both the human and the machine knew one thing for certain. Together, they could accomplish what no one else believed possible.